She conspired with numerous other individuals in and outside of Alaska, including juveniles, forever altering everybody's life.
It begins in the same way so many tragic stories do with Innocence. A laugh shared, a friendship formed, a promise made. But sometimes behind those quiet exchanges, darkness waits to bloom. Tonight we look into 3 stories each, bound by the same haunting thread: youth corrupted by impulse, power, and illusion. These are the cases of Denali Brehmer, Cristian Fernandez, and Philip Chism. 3 names that show how the fragile line between youth and monstrosity can disappear in a heartbeat. Denali Brehmer, Anchorage, Alaska, 2019. The city is small enough that everyone knows someone who knows someone. Among those names was Denali Brehmer, an 18-year-old with a restless online life and a social circle built mostly through screens. To her friends she seemed adventurous, fun, even loyal. But beneath that surface, something darker was quietly forming. Denali had been chatting for months with a man online who claimed to be a millionaire from Kansas. His name was Tyler, though that was only a mask. Behind the messages was a much older man. Someone who knew how to manipulate, how to make young people feel seen and important. Over time he began asking Denali for proof of loyalty, for challenges, for dangerous demonstrations of obedience. And then one day, he made her an offer she couldn't seem to resist: $9 million in exchange for proof that she could end a life. It sounds impossible, a cruel fantasy that no one would ever believe, but Denali didn't laugh it off. Instead, she turned toward her best friend, 19-year-old Cynthia Cece Hoffman, a kind-hearted, trusting girl with developmental disabilities. To Denali she was the perfect victim. Someone who trusted easily, someone who wouldn't see betrayal coming. On a quiet June day, Denali invited Cynthia to Thunderbird Falls, a scenic spot north of Anchorage. They laughed, took photos, and shared moments that seemed like any other day between close friends. But behind every smile, Denali knew what was coming. When the moment arrived, she restrained Cynthia with duct tape, then pushed her into the cold water. It was over within seconds. The crime shocked Alaska, not only because of its brutality, but because of how meaningless it was. Denali recorded parts of the act on Snapchat, sending them to Tyler, who continued to encourage her, offering praise and false promises of wealth. Later investigators would find hundreds of messages that painted a disturbing portrait. A young woman manipulated by greed, fantasy, and the dark side of the internet's anonymity. In the courtroom, Denali's composure shifted between regret and detachment. She claimed she had been groomed, controlled, brainwashed. And while there may have been truth in her manipulation, the choice was still hers. The prosecutors described it as evil, dressed as curiosity, an act of betrayal beyond comprehension. She was sentenced to 99 years in prison. The man behind Tyler, identified as 21-year-old Darren Schillmiller, faced charges of his own. Together they turned digital fantasy into devastating reality. Cristian Fernandez, Florida, 2011, Jacksonville. A 12-year-old boy named Cristian Fernandez sat quietly in a police interrogation room, his legs barely reaching the floor. His face showed no clear expression, not fear, not anger, just emptiness. Across from him sat detectives trying to understand what had happened inside that small apartment a few days earlier. Cristian's story was unlike most. He was the youngest person ever charged as an adult for murder in Florida. His childhood was chaos from the beginning. Born to a mother who was only 12 herself, abandoned by his father, raised in a cycle of neglect, violence, and instability. Cristian was left to care for his 2-year-old half-brother David. At some point, David began to cry uncontrollably. What happened next? Cristian later described as an accident. A burst of frustration turned into something irreversible. David was found unconscious and later died of a fractured skull. They charged him as an adult with first-degree murder. But others saw Cristian not as a monster, but as a mirror of the system that failed him. A child who had never been given structure, guidance, or compassion. The trial ignited a national debate. Can a 12-year-old truly understand the finality of death? Can he form the intent required to commit murder? Experts in child psychology testified that Cristian's emotional development was years behind his age. Others said that what mattered was the outcome, not the intention. In the end, the system bent but didn't break. Cristian accepted a plea deal that kept him in juvenile detention until age 19. When he was released, he would be monitored, guided, and hopefully rebuilt. He became a symbol of both tragedy and hope, proof that the line between victim and perpetrator is sometimes heartbreakingly thin. His story asks a question few want to answer: what do we do when the killer is still a child inside? Philip Chism, Danvers, Massachusetts. 2013. It was an ordinary autumn afternoon at Danvers High School. The halls were buzzing with laughter, the sound of lockers slamming shut, and plans for the weekend. Among the students walking those hallways was a quiet, intelligent 14-year-old boy named Philip Chism. Teachers described him as polite but withdrawn. He had recently moved from Tennessee, adjusting to a new environment, new classmates, new pressures. His math teacher, Colleen Ritzer, saw something in him: potential intelligence, quiet creativity. She often stayed after class to help him with lessons. But on October 22nd, that kindness would be met with unimaginable betrayal. Surveillance footage later showed Philip lingering after class, waiting. As Colleen walked into the restroom, he followed. What happened inside that room would haunt the school forever. Minutes later, Philip emerged carrying a recycling bin. Calm, methodical, inside that bin was the lifeless body of his teacher. The act was cold, detached, almost mechanical, as though emotion had been removed entirely. After leaving the building, Philip went to a nearby movie theater, bought a ticket, and watched a film as if nothing had happened. He was later found walking along a highway carrying Colleen's credit cards and her underwear in his backpack. Investigators searched for an explanation: bullying, mental illness, resentment, anything that could make sense of what seemed senseless. Philip's defense team claimed he was suffering from severe psychosis, that he heard voices urging him to act. But prosecutors argued this was premeditated, a young man fully aware of what he was doing, who took steps to hide evidence and escape detection. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy with grief. Colleen's family sat silently as prosecutors described the methodical nature of the attack. Philip never apologized directly, never offered a clear reason. Perhaps there wasn't one that would ever make sense. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. His case left the country divided once again between those who saw him as a calculating killer and those who believed he was a fractured boy overwhelmed by forces he couldn't control. But one truth remained: a brilliant teacher was gone, and an entire community would never feel safe in the same way again. 3 different stories. 3 young people. 3 irreversible choices: Denali Brehmer, Cristian Fernandez, and Philip Chism, names that remind us how fragile morality can be when shaped by chaos, manipulation, and despair. Each of them faced a moment when curiosity collided with consequence, when empathy faded into darkness. Their stories aren't just about crime, they're about the spaces where humanity fractures, where the internet, broken homes, and silent rage meet. They force us to ask, are monsters born or made? And if they're made, how many more could we be creating in the shadows right now? If you made it this far, it means you're searching for answers, for understanding, or maybe just for truth. These stories aren't easy to hear, but they matter. Because behind every headline lies a question that could save someone else. If you want more deep, real stories like this, subscribe to the channel.